Go. It's good to see you all here this morning. We have some visitors with us, and we're really thankful that you've come our way. Today is our last class on this course called Equipping Our Kids and Grandkids for Life. So we've come full circle from raising them as very small babies. Now we're going to talk about what happened when it's time for them to leave us, to go out on their own. So we'll begin our class with a word of prayer. We've asked Ryan if he would lead us in that prayer.
Please. Most righteous Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this chance we have to be in this class. Specifically, we thank you for the role of the family and the special responsibility that we have as parents. And we pray that you be with all of us individually, whether we are parents or future parents, or our children have grown and left, or even if we don't have children, but still have a place to mentor the children of this congregation. We pray that we will question our assumptions, and we will always be ready to leave behind bad practices, perhaps things that were in our childhood, that we pray that we might be closer to you, and that we might equip our children to be servants of yours. And we pray that we instill in them no greater honor than to be your servant. And that is truly the purpose of our lives. We pray that you be with us as we go about this class in Jesus' name. Amen.
So next week, the study will be on, I believe it's Jesus and his miracles. Parables. And I think Cody's going to be leading us in that class. So make sure and get your material as you leave today and be prepared for that next Sunday, Lord willing. So at the end of class, we should have time, and I'd like for you to be thinking while we're in class about what takeaways or what things did you learn or things that you recollected from your prior knowledge that was significant to you from this class. Anything that you'd like to relate as a part of our review at the very end. So be thinking about that as we go. All right, for the last time, we're going to do our memory verse. And this is Matthew chapter 5, verse 11. And it is, "Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake." All right. So this week we're going to be talking about the time in our lives when it's time for our kids to go, to leave us. As children prepare to advance in school or to go to college or enter the military, we as parents are confronted with the reality that our kids are growing up. The parent is suddenly faced with the feeling that this parental attachment is in jeopardy that they've had since birth, since the umbilical cord. And this notion of letting go can create levels of anxiety that most parents are not prepared for, with an intensity that most parents don't expect. Many report experiencing feelings of like mourning a loss. And it's much easier said than done when the time comes to break that very close parent-child relationship and connection. Whether it's the end of the breastfeeding or the first day of kindergarten, remember that? When you sent them off to kindergarten, or the time when they are heading off to college and you've packed up their car and you're watching them drive away, or the time when you're walking your daughter down the aisle to give her away. This is a time that can create a very difficult emotional tug of war for us as parents. So why is that so hard? Why is it so hard for most of us to let our children go? What are the thoughts going through your mind? Some of you, many of you here have experienced that. Stephen?
Each of those phases, the relationship changes a little bit. And I have to modify myself. And I have to choose to make some changes that are hard to make. You talk about walking your daughters down the aisle. And that's that's a big change. You're now surrendering your headship of your daughter and my family to another man. I mean, that's a big change. Now, I have to change how I respect them in that relationship. Boundaries have to be set that cannot be crossed to keep the health of the family. So it's
Right.
It's emotional. It makes me want to cry right now.
That's right. Change
I
is
love them and I love my son-in-laws. They're awesome, but it's just that feeling of change.
right. Yeah, things are going to be different, right? It's going to require us to act differently around them. What else? What are some other thoughts that have gone through your mind, especially those of you who experienced this, when it's time to let our kids go? Things are going to change, right? Okay. Things are going to be different. You're not going to see them all the time, right? They're not going to be there to talk to share with. Yes, Stu.
Such a big part of your life for so many years.
Yes.
If there's this void or gap, it gets filled. But at that first, however long it takes, it's shocking how much you participate.
That's right. Your life largely evolves around your kids, right? Especially if they're active kids. There's so many activities and school functions and sports and all those things, right, that really take your time. And now you've got that time. Right. Any fears that you have? Yes, Kyle?
Use the word that's on my mind.
Okay.
Feelings of fear, I think. I know that's been a point for me in thinking about how my kids are going to be making decisions without me being as involved in that decision-making process. I think there's also a sense of regret sometimes that so much time has passed so quickly, and things that maybe we had intended to do with our kids, those opportunities seem like they may be behind us.
Right. That's right. There was a survey conducted of over 8,000 parents, so a good broad survey, and it asked this question: what's the greatest fear of letting go of your child? And the results were interesting, and we'll use this as a springboard for our class today. So 4% said, I will let go too soon. I will let go too soon. Maybe not quite ready. Maybe I'm not just really ready for any number of reasons for them to leave. 9% said, I haven't given my child enough. So again, that sense that maybe they're not quite prepared. Maybe their toolkit is not really fully packed yet to leave the safety and protection of our homes. I haven't given my child enough yet. 15%, my child is too fragile and not ready for independence. Too fragile, not ready for independence. This one's interesting. If something happens, it'll be my fault. So the sense of guilt that I haven't prepared them well enough, that if they really make a big mistake, they're not suffering the consequences. I'm going to have to deal with the consequences, and it's really my fault for not equipping them well. 15%, I need my child in my life. This one is interesting. So the sense of codependency, where the child is so integral to the family and to the relationship, perhaps even between husband and wife, that when that child leaves, it's going to disrupt the whole family dynamic. There may be codependency there that is unhealthy, and we'll talk about that in class today. 12%, I am dependent, here it is, on the love bond with my child. The relationship is so close, they're my best friend, let's say, or my confidant, and without them in my life, it's going to be highly disruptive. And the 29% said that more than 4 of the choices are all of the above. So some reveal a fear that the parent hasn't done enough to prepare the child, or perhaps they've done too much for the child and haven't allowed the child to make smaller decisions and deal with the consequences of those decisions, whether good or bad. Another strong current we saw here in this survey is the belief that the parent can't make it on their own, without depending upon their child. There may be a strong codependency that's developed between parent and child. You may have seen this in your family or elsewhere. We also see in the survey results the parental guilt that inevitably comes from the parent not equipping or preparing the child well enough, and when things go badly, the parents assume the responsibility for that. You may have seen this reaction before, perhaps in your family or elsewhere. As you all know, the title of this class is Equipping Our Kids and Grandkids for Life. So isn't the primary role of us as parents, to prepare our kids for this time, for the time in which they can exist independently of us? That's assuming they're capable of doing so. Isn't the primary role of the parent to equip our kids with the skills and abilities that they need to go out into the world and to meet its challenges, its trials, its temptations, and to ultimately make their own decisions and deal with the consequences of mistakes that they make? Would you agree with that? That that's the primary role of us, to prepare them so they can be independent, to go out in their life, right? Hopefully, prayerfully be a child of God, and to prepare their children accordingly to be children of God. Parenting is all about providing the tools that our kids need to make wise decisions and to be able to discern while they're on their own. I believe all of us parents know if we have children that are capable of living independently, that this day is going to come, right? The day is going to come in which we're going to have to let our kids go. But let's look at this passage in Genesis 2:24, which makes it very clear that if our child is going to marry, they have to go. You know, God expects them to go, expects them to leave, and to establish the relationship now. The primary relationship is with their spouse. So we know it's very clear, if they're going to marry, they got to go. They need to go. Therefore, a man should leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, or cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. It's God's will and his design that the man should leave his father and mother. This involves the father and mother letting them go, right? You may have witnessed some of these struggles before, where the parents tend to want to be involved still in that new relationship of the child and their spouse, and the child leaving the direction of their parents. And this is a whole other topic for a marriage class, right? Not so much a parenting class. So there's a whole lot more we could say on this, but let's just move on. The transition process of letting go technically begins when the umbilical cord is cut, right? Prior to that point, the child was 100% dependent upon the mother. And after that point, it is a degree of separation that we must monitor and allow as the child grows and becomes independent. So it's up to us as parents from an early age to begin the process of gradually allowing our kids to become more and more independent. Gradually, we as parents must shift the responsibility from 100% us. When that child is just a toddler, we're 100% responsible, right? To them being 100% responsible for their own life. So let's talk in general terms now. This was a question in your discussion questions about this transition of responsibility at various stages of life. So let's just kind of run through this. So what steps of letting go change during the following stages of our kids' lives? Let's talk about toddler. So how does this work whenever you have a toddler? You have a baby, it's just crawling around. Yes, Stephen?
Just a simple idea of them feeding themselves at some point. You have to let them do it.
Yeah, right. That's right. As messy as it is, right? It's a lot easier to do it yourself, right? Yes. And so we're going to be setting, at this age, because they're not responsible themselves, we're going to set restrictions and boundaries. We're going to kind of monitor those very closely. Things like electrical outlets, stairs, access to the pool. They're not able to go out on their own, right? We've got to watch them very, very closely. Strict boundaries and controls. And then when they're able to assume more responsibility, like eating on their own or walking or going up the stairs, we're going to carefully monitor that and allow them that independence when it's safe to do so. Let's kind of jump now to school-age kids. These are kids that are first grade through, let's say, the end of elementary school, grade 5 or so. So how does this transition work of responsibility at this age? Those of you who have parents this age. Friends. So what about friends?
Well, going through that process of choosing friends or maybe no longer being friends and
Yeah.
figuring all that out.
Yeah, it's just this process of guiding them through how to select friends, right? And your involvement in watching those relationships. Is it a healthy relationship? And perhaps sometimes you have to step in. What about other responsibility? Yes, Ryan.
Sophia, starting like in kindergarten, is you're right there with them, doing everything with them, and then did you do this? And you're signing everything, and then as they age, it's more independence of like you need to bring this to me, you need to make sure to do this, and you're just checking, and then if they fail, then you reel it back in a little bit, and then
Right.
start all over.
Right.
That's all very light. I don't do that.
Thanks, Sophia. So it's close monitoring and control until they demonstrate they're trustworthy, right? Or can assume more responsibility. You give it to them and monitor. Increase responsibility, give it to them and monitor results, right? So it's this checking process. Yes, Nick.
One thing for me that is still difficult is allowing my son to sit with his friends at worship. Even that, I'm like, so it's still
Yeah.
difficult. It's in the same room, but I have to trust that he knows the guidelines. You pay attention, you take notes, and yes, you can sit with your friend. But that's
And you've got Ben watching from the front up there. So this process of allowing them, initially when they're young, you're going to pick out their clothes for them, what you think is appropriate to wear. But as they age, you're probably going to start allowing them some freedom in what they wear, right? As long as it's within, acceptable standards. But you're going to give them more and more control, more and more responsibility. Let's go on to teenage. This is probably the most difficult age, in my view, right? Why? Because the teenager is becoming more autonomous. They believe they're more responsible than they probably really are. And you have the struggle of control at this age. So how does the transition work here as a teenager? Yes, Dan.
Challenges for teenagers is recognizing the difference between them developing their own identity and them not losing their faith and their spiritual guidance. I mean, it can be very difficult for what maybe we thought they ought to be or what we think their interests should be versus the identity they develop for themselves, whether it's personality, whether it's interests, whatever, and being able to separate that from, hey, this is what I kind of like you to do versus what they want, and separating that from what they're doing is not a violation of God's will. They're not really, and that kind of letting them become themselves. And that's I taught junior high as a substitute for a little bit. That's one of the biggest things I saw was just these kids trying to develop their own, who they are.
Mm-hmm. Rusty?
There's a whole list of things that's transitioning into the adult you want them to become that are mundane. How to drive a car, how to make dinner, how to do your own laundry, right? Having expectations that they participate more in the work of the house on their own. All of those concepts seem to be through these teenagers. When they talk about work, right? As a parent, it's difficult for us to know when and how much that's okay, right? How much do you let them be a kid and deal with school, and how much do you let them have responsibility to an employer? And, all those transitions.
Yep. Stephen?
I think it's also, all those things are awesome, but I think all of them have a point of trust. And so you have each, it's a gradual process of trusting them more and more that they prove themselves that trust over and over again.
Absolutely, right. We're going to talk about a parable that's going to help us understand this concept of responsibility and trust. So as a teenager, this is where clearly defined house rules, right? We talked about establishing rules that support your family vision are really important. Establish the rules, get everybody's buy-in, and then let the rules be the bad guy, right? We did this with driving. We established a driving contract with our sons. And when they got a ticket, it was in black and white. Here's what you do. You got to pay for the ticket, right? You got to pay for the increase in the insurance. When they had a wreck, what does the contract say? So it wasn't us, it was the mutually agreed upon rules. So I strongly recommend that, right? And then as they comply with those rules, it allows for increased responsibility. Let's go on. Those are all good comments. College, trade school, job, military, right? And now they're leaving us. They're going to go out on their own. They're ready to make decisions. So being able to set the alarm clock and get up for college on time is absolutely basic but critical, right? Being able to wash your own clothes, be able to maintain a household in that apartment. Being able to, and ensuring that their devotion to God is critically important to them while they're away from us, right? Making sure that they really get that before they go. Managing competing priorities. You've got college deadlines, you've got projects, you've got all these things going on, right? So largely at this stage, they need to be ready to go, right? They need to be equipped to go to handle all these priorities and challenges on their own. And of course, the next stage of life is hopefully marriage and then adults. So adult children need a different kind of parenting than when our children are at home. One of the hardest things I've personally had to learn is that advice should not be given to my adult sons unless it's asked for. That's been really hard for me. And honestly, I haven't followed that rule very consistently. But I understand the need for it, and I recognize that I need to follow that rule with my own kids. That even though I'm watching them make a mistake, and I would have done it way differently, right? I need to allow them to do that on their own. And I can imagine that some of you may be struggling with that as well. Sometimes our adult kids don't want advice even when it's needed. When our adult kids want is our approval of the decisions that they've made and our blessings on those decisions. And if we as parents have equipped them well for the tools they need to make wise decisions, it probably will be okay. It may not be exactly the way we would have done it, right? It may not be the exact desired outcome, but as long as we've equipped them well, it'll probably work out okay. So let's go on now. Let's talk about some practical principles in letting our kids go. Letting our kids go means letting our kids do things for themselves. So Maria Montessori, who was the founder of the Montessori schools, she advised parents to not do anything a child can do for themselves. Let me say that again. Don't do anything for your child they can do for themselves. That's a pretty bold statement, right? It may not look pretty. It may not be the best bed being made. You know, it may be the pretty bad lawn mowing job. But if they can do it, she advises, don't do it for them. Don't take it over. It may involve redoing what they've done, right? If you've set clear expectations and standards, and it's obvious it hasn't met that standard, then just simply pointing that out kindly, and then having the work redone. I remember our son Nathan was the guy who mowed the grass, and we had some standards for how the grass should look, and I would walk out there, and there'd be gaps, you know, and I would just walk out with Nathan, and we just step there and look. Really wouldn't say anything. We would just look kind of at that general area, right? And he would get it. He'd go, oh, yeah, see, I need to go back and do that, redo that. Once a child has learned a skill, we should not do that service for the child unless there's a really good reason, like a broken leg or a broken arm, right? We need to let them learn to do that and to improve upon it. Kids must learn from the mistakes they make. Redoing a job to higher standards is just a way of them learning. And that's a skill that will help them throughout their lives. Redoing it to a standard and improvement. If we provide instructions to our child, we should insist upon that task being performed in accordance with those instructions. Our kids need to learn to devote attention to their quality, to suffer consequences when they fail to meet those agreed upon standards. This is a concept I know you all know, but our kids need to really understand this, that do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will reap corruption. We know this is a spiritual application, but it can apply to any standards that you set in your home, right? They should deal with the consequences. Any points you want to make on that before we move on? Yes?
This is something I deal with all the time, just at school with kids and working on buttons and zippers and washing their hands and, and then before I had kids, it was easy to be very judgmental and say, you need to let them put their own shoes on every time you're going to go somewhere. Well, as a mom, if you want to get where you're going to go, and then there are also times, especially like if you have a Stella at your house who wants to do everything, there are also times where they have to understand you're going to say, I let you try it, now it's my turn, I'm doing it, and then we're going to go. So you have to have a balance. The Montessori, I get it, all kids are not driven to do things on their own. That works if they have that kind of drive. Not every kid has that ability or the drive to do it. So you have to kind of know your kid and let them understand that there's going to be times for both of those things.
I'll still stand by what she said, but I get your point. Yes, Ben?
How did you and Dorothy, with this principle you just mentioned, how did you guys find that balance? So you talked about the lawn mowing and things like that, and I understand, what Heather's saying too, that is challenging at times where
sometimes accept a lower standard than you would normally expect, right? But don't give in. Don't give in to their insistence, I can't do it, or I don't want to do it, or whatever, right? As early as, yeah.
Toy box, but every stage has a different step, and they had on their mirror, whatever your hand binded to do it with all your might. And so we held them to a high standard. But there were times you give in too, because you don't have time, like Heather said, or it's just not worth it. Nathan's room was a disaster. And that became a problem, but he was in a bedroom with a big bed, so the guests were coming, maps are in there, music, it had to be spick and span, otherwise we just shut the door.
Put like danger tape across it. See on the next point. Letting go is tied to establishing trust. In parenting, we must let go of the reins gradually. When our child takes responsibility and does his job well, in accordance with the standards we set, the parent's able to trust that child with greater responsibility. On the other hand, when our child fails to meet the responsibility or obligation, we need to continue to show progress toward additional responsibility before additional trust is given to them. This standard, I think, is established well here in Matthew 25 in the parable of the talents. So he who had received 5 talents came and bought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of our Lord. And then the other point here is that this is a 5-talent kid. We have a 2-talent kid here, right? Also, he also who had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. So some of your kids may wonder, why are they given more responsibility than others? Maybe they're a 2-talent kid, right? And you're gonna judge their abilities and talents, and you're gonna give them responsibility in accordance with that, and allow them to grow, be faithful, and then be receiving more responsibility. Making our children understand this principle is very important. In reality, this concept of gaining trust before given more responsibility is a principle that will come to bear in every relationship they have. It's going to be true in their work, with their friends, in their school, and in their marriage, right? This is a foundational principle about establishing trust. Can you think of an Old Testament individual who did this? An Old Testament character who was given some responsibility and who did well and was given additional responsibility? Who? Joseph. Yeah, Joseph's the one that comes to mind. His faithfulness and diligence led him to eventually be the overseer to his master's house. And then he was over prisoners, and then he was over all of Egypt. He was like the number 2 guy in the whole kingdom. Started out smaller and grew as he established the trust. Let's go on to the third point. Letting go means releasing control over our children. So this process of letting go is like teaching a child to ride a bike. Very, very similar, I think. When they're learning how to ride a bike, we hold the bike. They get them on there, right? We hold the bike up. We run alongside them, or walk first and then run. And once they seem to kind of have it down, we let go, but very carefully. We don't go very far away, right? We don't be able to grab the bike when it starts to totter. On occasion, they're going to fall down, and they're going to get bruised up, maybe a little bit. Make sure they have a helmet on. There are necessary steps to learning how to ride a bike. They've got to fall occasionally, right? Then after they've learned it, we're going to teach them how to ride. We're going to teach them how to safely stop, look both ways at the streets, right? We're going to teach them how to signal their intentions. We're going to warn them about the dangers of riding on their own, right? So very gradual release of control over that child. Can you imagine a parent who refuses to teach their child to ride a bike for fear, for the fear factor that the child's going to get hurt? Can you imagine? Do you know of anyone like that? I'm so afraid they're going to get hurt. I'm not going to teach them. I can't bear that, right? What are some outcomes of overly protective parents like that? What have you seen as being some outcomes of that? The overly protective parent.
Child's not going to be there. Mom and dad are not there when they go to college. You know, they can on the other side of the extreme. Never had opportunities to figure things out on my own. So
Right.
you're better off helping them when you have that supervision.
And they're in your control.
While they're at the house and just saying, no, I can't ever let something bad happen, or then become disappointed or something like that.
Right. So this, it may end up in a situation where the child is actually afraid to leave home. They're afraid to leave the safety and protection of home. The child may have no confidence or may not have any ambition. They just are convinced that they can't function on their own. This is the child perhaps that will complain when things aren't given to them or when they don't go their own way, because their parents have given them everything and overprotected them. And as Ben mentioned, these are the kids that when they finally break free, they finally hit a point of breaking free, they just go wild. You may have seen some of your friends at school in this case, perhaps from a Christian, close-knit Christian family, right? Where they just had exercised every freedom possible and just went to an extreme, as Ben mentioned. I saw it. I saw it at Florida College. I saw it at A&M. And then I think you had something, Tanya?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. I've worked with a lot of kids that got super rebellious, which then had consequences for them as young adults. And then they also had a lot of resentment for their parents. And so as an adult, when their parents wanted them to come around, they had no desire to do so because they felt so controlled and trapped
Yes.
when they were adults.
Yep. So, yes.
We have a student right now who's 18 years old. The parents, he was born with some disability, and the parents kept him home, refused to bring him out. And both parents died.
Oh.
And so he's finally enrolled in school and knows how to do nothing.
Yeah.
And so we're teaching him, as in
Basic life skills.
we actually had him the fact of not riding a bike because he's living in temporary but just basic skills as counting and money and telling time and stuff like that. He doesn't know any of that when he's 18.
Sad,
So,
sad.
but the nice thing is he's not rebellious.
Yeah.
He's eager to learn. He wants
Good.
to do things.
That's good.
Positive side of it too.
Yeah.
When he finds the right set of people to guide, when the student finds the right set of people to guide.
He's thankful for you.
Because you have social workers and everybody involved in that.
Yeah.
So you do have those situations.
So when we as parents protect our kids to the point, overprotect our kids, then we're going to raise kids that are not equipped for life, right? And perhaps kids who ended up being foolish, very, very foolish, when they do finally break out. Some parents refuse to let go of the reins altogether. Some parents refuse to let go of the reins. In reality, they're just shifting how they hold or control their reins. You know, when our kids are very young, it's a very physical control, right? It's our domain, it's our home, it's our rules, right? And we talked about this when we talked about discipline, right? So we discipline our kids if needed by spanking or timeout or sending the child to their room or grounding, depending upon the circumstances. We talked about there's a wide range of physical discipline that may be employed, right? But it's physical. So now that our children are adults, some parents are going to change this physical control to emotional or psychological control. And let me give you some examples here. See if you've seen this. Hopefully you can read it. It's pretty small. Where this is the parent to the child. I might be able to buy that new ski outfit for you if you do this or that. What does that look like to you? The child is out on their own, but the parent's still trying to control them to do what they want them to do. So it looks like bribery to you, right? You will not see another cent from me as long as you, right? So now we're going to use psychological kind of methods to try to control our adult child. I've lived longer than you and I know better. Take it from me. I remember my dad giving me that one. If you go that way, you know how you're going to end up. Well, let me tell you how you're going to end up. It's a good thing your father's not here alive, because if he knew that, it would be this or that. The bottom line is that the parent, in this case, hasn't let go, right? They're trying to control, manipulate their child psychologically, emotionally, maybe financially, to do what they want them to do. This conduct may be, at worst, it may be sinful. At best, it will probably create a situation that's going to create resentment and prevent a mature relationship between that parent and child. So be very careful with these sort of emotional, psychological tactics from adult to adult. I think Dan and then Stephen.
One thing I would say is, I speak from my own failure partially, as well as how some others have treated my children, but if you don't allow children at some point to step out and make their own mistakes, if you're always taking away any potential consequences, if you don't do that early enough, then eventually they don't believe there's ever a consequence for what they did. I have adult children right now, but still, because somebody else is doing things for them, still do not understand the idea that when you do things, there's a consequence. And the problem is going to be that one of these days, as was mentioned earlier, nobody's going to be there to catch them. And the consequence then is going to be so significant and so hard, it's just going to be extremely challenging.
It's going to be a train wreck.
Now, the only other thing I would say is, going to point number 2 up there, you will not see another cent from me as long as. I do think there is a sense in which I have children who have certain learning challenges just inherently. But I have told them that as long as you are not willing to serve the Lord, I'm not going to support a lifestyle. And I'm not going to help you engage in a lifestyle that is completely contrary to the will of God. And if you're not even making an attempt to do what's right, then I'm not going to support you and do things that would endorse or give any indication that I support the life that you're living.
Right. Stephen?
You know, sometimes if we're not careful, we something, whether it's financially or time, and then hold that against them in the future without ever having made this pact, but then bring it up and say, oh, well, I did this for you, and so
Yes.
I deserve this from you now. Whoa.
Yes.
So it really wasn't a gift. It wasn't something you were helping.
There's an ulterior motive.
It was a bomb that you planted in my marriage, my relationship, or whatever it may be, so that you can execute that later. That's wrong. That's so
Yep.
wrong.
It's a great point. Let's go on. Yes, Troy.
Involved with an outdoor adventure group several years ago, and we kind of did a lot of this with those boys. They were anywhere between 13 and 18 years old, and we really felt like it was our job to not help them always succeed, not be there to let them catastrophically fail, but we always talked about helping them to stay inside the guardrails. As an example, they had planned out what their meals were going to be for a weekend, and one of the meals, to demonstrate certain skills, everything was from a can. So they got to add all the cans of all this stuff to this pot, and that was their soup or whatever. They failed to remember one important thing.
Can opener.
What Dan said is to allow them to have small failures. Because we were not going to let them starve. And I made it a teaching moment. I said, let me go get my Leatherman and we're going to have a little short class on how to open a can with a manual can opener. So I showed them how to do it, let them do it. But that was part of that moment to not let them fail to the point where they were just totally disgusted and, oh man, we should have thought about that, now we can't eat. We were there to kind of be the backstop and to allow them to fail. There was the breakfast the next morning. And so we let them borrow ours, we let them borrow this, that, or the other, just so that they could fail a little bit, and it makes it a teaching moment for them too.
Yeah. I bet they won't forget next time.
Yeah.
And I think this broke. Is that? Here we go. Let's go on. Letting go versus codependency and enabling our child. Children do not always make good decisions that please us, right? They're not going to always do it exactly the way we would do it. But I think that maxim here in Proverbs 22:6 is a general statement of truth which has many exceptions. I think we've established this already, right? Train up a child in the way he should go, and then when he's old, he will not depart from it. We know that's a general statement, like much of Proverbs. So remember back in Ezekiel 18, we read of the situation of a righteous man, Eli, who raised some really ungodly kids, right? And he was condemned for not restraining his adult sons. You remember that? And as you remember the story, Eli served as the high priest. He oversaw the Lord's work. He had the responsibility of overseeing what went on in and around the tabernacle when he saw his son's sinful behavior, and it says that he did know about it. He should have acted as the high priest to have them removed from office. Instead, he did not restrain his sons. So unfortunately, some parents whose children have made wrong decisions about their lives have trouble coming to grips with the bad choices they've made. We must come to grips with the fact that we cannot control the choices that our adult children make. Even kids who are out of our control, even partially, they've got to be able to suffer their own consequences. We cannot try to cover for them, to hide their sin, to reduce the consequences of their sin, of their mistakes. We've got to let them work that out. Hopefully they'll come to us for advice. The problem of accepting that one's child is sinful and wayward is complicated by the fact that we as Christians often view our own spirituality in terms of how our kids turn out, right? We view our own spirituality oftentimes by our children. Jane Addams in the book said that when our grown children disappoint us, says this: the lives of our grown children constitute an important lens through which we judge ourselves and our accomplishments. It is through reconsidering their adult successes and failures that we seek retroactively to validate the kind of parents we were. Do you believe that, right? Sometimes we take too much stock in the successes and failures of our kids. The problem may be particularly hard for Christians because we often view our self-worth as a Christian tied to the choices our kids have made, over which we have no direct control. Very, very difficult point here. Let's go on to our final point, and that is letting go and the empty nest. This was alluded to, I think, by Stu earlier, right? We as parents need to remember that our kids are not the whole of our lives. We may have them for maybe 20 to 25% of their life, right? If you have a bunch of kids, like some of our families, this period in which you have children may be pretty long, right? Or it may be short. It may be for a relatively short period of time. So what challenges do parents face as their kids are finally gone for good? I think, Stu, you mentioned one. What are some other challenges that we as parents face when we have all this time, right, with a spouse that we may not know all that well? Yes, Rusty.
Reestablishing your marital relationship, right?
That's right, yeah.
Focus on the kids.
That's right, yeah. And better yet, to start working on that well before, right? To keep it strong, keep those embers going well before the kids are gone, right? So it's not just a stark difference of what do we do now that we don't have all these soccer games to go to and all these band competitions to go to and all these things we did when our kids were in high school. Yes, Dane?
That's a good point, because in essence, we don't realize if you're not showing the strength of the marriage, the two as one, while the kids are there, they're seeing that there is more of a relationship towards them than with each other. They pick up on these things. Mm-hmm. And so while you're having to re-establish yourself now as just the two of them, they're seeing all of that. And that's what they're judging what marriages look like as well.
Exactly right. Yeah. So we need to keep our marriages alive and thriving all through this process for the reason you mentioned and all these other reasons. Here's a poem that I thought was really helpful. Let me go back to it here. If I have it. Yeah, here it is. Letting go does not mean we stop caring. It means that I can't do it for them anymore. Letting go is not to enable them, but to allow learning from the consequences of their actions. Letting go is not to fix, but it's to be supportive, to be there if they seek our advice. Letting go is not to be in the middle of arranging all the outcomes, it's to arrange all the possible outcomes so they're going to be favorable. I've been guilty of that. But to allow others to determine their own destiny. Letting go is not being protective, it's to permit another to face reality. Letting go is not to deny, but to accept. Letting go is not to nag, to scold, or argue, but instead to enable them to search out their own shortcomings and to correct them. Letting go is not to regret the past, but to grow and to live for the future. So hopefully that's helpful. Yes, Dane?
You could sum that up by saying is letting go is you're never going to stop being a parent.
Right, that's right. Right, that's right.
Being a parent is just a change.
It changes. It's a different stage altogether. So what other advice or guidance do you have on this subject of letting your kids go? Other advice? Yes, Dorothy? Oh.
Choose your battles as they're growing up, and invest in a very loud alarm clock. Started low and they got louder and louder and louder.
Good investment. Yeah. Anything else? You had to get up and get out of bed, which made it easier to actually get going. Yeah, Stephen?
Respect them as adults.
Yes.
Adults talk to
Mm-hmm.
them as if they're adults.
Right, yeah.
They're full-grown adults. They're
Mm-hmm.
just be more of a peer with. I'm still a parent, but I want to treat them as if they're full-grown.
Yeah, right. So there are many blessings. Let me finish, then we'll come back to you. There's many blessings that will flow when we let our kids go, especially when they're well-equipped. And it's these things that you mentioned, Stephen. So we watch them develop their independence, become their own young man or woman, pursue a career, become involved in their own churches. We witness them, getting married, falling in love, raising their own family, and the best time of all, having grandkids. And then it's a time when your relationship changes, as Stephen mentioned, from parent-child to more friend confidant, right? It's this, and if you can achieve that with your child, what a wonderful thing it is. What a wonderful thing it is. So, in summary, our mission as parents is really to train them, to equip them to be independent, if they're capable of being independent, to stand on their own, to make it in the world, to enjoy the blessings of what this world and the next world has to offer. Do you have something, Dane? Okay. Thank you all.